of equivalent exchange, and it's raw how I swivel in the lane. They asking who to go, watch them motherfuckers scribbling my name, cause my rhymes cause a ripple in the frames and the planes of existence. You can see my mane in the distance, alchemical, them stains is persistent. She said that I was better than every ex she dated, so she wanted me to dive in the biggest hook and excavate it. When I begin to notice a pattern I tessellated, then I predict.
Yo, what's going on, folks? Welcome to Icapod. I am your host, Be Good, and I got a great episode for you today. We're going to walk through my top 10 reasons for why I don't trust the Bible, why I disbelieve the Bible. And this was born because someone asked me recently to send them a list of what issues could somebody have with the Bible, with the Christian faith. And I began to put that list together. And the further I got through it, I don't think I was able to come up with 10 on the spot. But the further I got through it, the more I began to say, you know what? This actually is worth having a conversation about. So I'm going to run through my top 10. They may not be your top 10. You might have some other reasons, but I think this is a pretty good list. There are many, many points of contact when it comes to why people are leaving faith and the Christian faith in particular. I'm going to give you the biblical reasons, but there are other reasons outside of the Bible. We're going to stick with strictly biblical reasons today. So I got a feeling some people are not going to like this video, but hopefully it will at least make you think, and it'll cause you to question what you believe and why, and question the answers, because maybe you've asked these questions and someone gave you an answer to make you feel like, oh, I can still trust it because of this. Might even actually cause you to question the answers that you've been given. And so with that being said, we'll dive in. This list is not in any kind of order of importance. So even for me, number 5 might actually really be number 1 for me, or number 8 might be number 1 for you. As I list them, I'm not going in order of importance. This is just the order that they popped into my mind in. And so we'll begin to run through them, all right? Oh, by the way, don't forget to do the things. You know what I mean? Hit the buttons. Make sure you like.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Number 1, reconciling the Bible with modern science. And I know for a lot of people, that one, depending on how you've been educated or how you've allowed yourself to be educated, that may or may not be a big deal for you. But this one matters precisely because there is a large number of Christians who believe that God has given us trustworthy information about the world in which we live, about how it came to be and why life began, and that this information can be found in the opening pages of the Bible, and that this information can be fact-checked or validated by modern science. I would actually agree that if this is true, if it can be validated this way, then this buys the Bible credence. It means that the book is trustworthy because we have reason to believe that its author is God and not man. Why? Because nobody but God was there at the beginning. So only a God would know the details about creation and be able to communicate them, especially in a pre-scientific age. But if these claims about the Earth's and our origin are fact-checked and the reality is found to be other than what the scriptures say, then this calls the reliability of the entire biblical project into question. Now, when we say science presents a problem for the Bible, what are we talking about? We're talking about things like, in the Bible, the earth exists before the light source that provides the earth with daytime light. And I said it that way for a reason. Now, we know what provides the earth with daytime light is the sun. We also now know that the way planets form is planets don't form before their suns. The star forms first, and the planets are part of the accretion that forms after the star. So you've got to reconcile that. We're also talking about things like the author of Genesis believes that the sky is a solid dome covering a flat earth. We now know that there is no dome covering the earth and that the earth is not flat. You will get a ton of apologists trying to tell you that that's not what the authors meant. That's not what those people believe. You will also get a few honest Christians who will tell you, no, that is what that is what the text is suggesting. And there are other passages in the Bible that bear this out. Think about passages like God stretches out the heavens like a tent. Well, what do you do with the tent? You have to anchor the tent to the ground. The sky is a dome anchored to the ground in the mindset of the people who wrote the scriptures. We could also talk about Genesis 1 and 2, reporting that God made mankind de novo, meaning separate and apart from the animal kingdom and as a single couple named Adam and Eve. But we now know that humans evolved from a population, not from a couple, and share a common ancestor with other species and life forms. And maybe the most important theologically, the Bible says that death came to mankind as a result of human sin. But we now know that death was in the world long before human beings, and humans are the result of the dying out of species that were less fit for the environment. Humans are not the cause of death, rather, death is the cause of humans. Now, a typical response from Christian apologists is that the Bible is not a science book. But that is the wrong subject. The real question is not, is the Bible a science book? The question is the Bible a history book? Is it telling us about real things that actually happen in history? The only reason science comes into play is because the scientific method allows us to test whether or not what someone is saying about history is true. Now, this does not end the discussion for Christian apologists, because they will then say, well, what if Genesis is giving us history, but the way they told history was different from the way we tell it? They told history by retelling popular myths and substituting parts of the story that would communicate ideas that were important to them. Okay? Even if that's the case, if this is how they told history, by creating mytho-history, as some like to call it, then at best, what we have in the Bible is unverifiable claims. And we don't even know what the actual claims are. We don't know what parts of the stories are myth and what parts are meant to be historical claims. But either way, there's no way to verify or validate any of it, because if it's figurative, then it does not lend itself to the scientific method of investigation. We're left on our own to figure out what the actual claims are, and then somehow to decide whether or not those claims are worth believing. I break all of this down in chapters 3 through 6 of my book, Let There Be Gaslight. Does the Bible tell the truth about our creation, fall, and redemption? But we've got 9 more reasons to get through, so let's move on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Coming in at number 2, similar myths in other cultures. So, we have other, older, ancient Near East cultures that have the same or very similar mythological stories. A little while back, the Christian textual researcher Wes Huff rose to fame debating and debunking internet guru Billy Carson in a somewhat impromptu online discussion. Though Wes clearly got the best of Carson, it is worth noting that Billy was not completely ineffectual. He put forth the notion that much of the Bible's primordial history has been borrowed from the nations around Israel at the time of writing. Billy was not totally prepared to marshal out all the evidence of this claim, but it is there for all to see, and biblical scholars know it. In fact, more and more, even conservative Christian Old Testament scholars are finding it necessary to rethink their understanding of early Genesis, as it becomes apparent just how much of these other older myths has ended up in the Bible in some way. For example, you can see the work of Bill T. Arnold, who wrote the textbook that many young Christians, such as myself, read in Bible college in the 90s and 2000s. But compare that with the updated commentary on Genesis that he wrote in 2009. There's too much to go through it all here and now, but I break all of this down in chapters 7 through 9 of my book, Let There Be Gaslight. These first two issues relate to early Genesis, but the problems don't end there. Moving on. Number 3, non-historical history. The lack of historical attestation for the Exodus and Israel's conquest in the Promised Land. For the sake of time, I'm going to begin to run through these, but suffice it to say, there is widespread disagreement among conservative Christian scholars as to when the Exodus occurred. Could it have happened when the Bible says it happened, or did it happen several hundred years later? But critical scholars are sure that there is no evidence at all to support the biblical claim that the Exodus ever happened, let alone the conquest of Canaan under Joshua. These events are most likely not history, but rather cases of revisionist history. Moving on, number 4, pretend prophecies. This refers to the extreme likelihood, or at least the very real possibility, that the prophecies in the Old Testament were Vaticinium ex eventu. What does that mean? Written after the events they claim to be foretelling, and passed off as if they were written beforehand. Now, slow down and think about this. I know me as a Christian, I would read these written prophecies and take it at face value that this must be what happened. And it never crossed my mind to think just how easy it would have been for someone to write about the past, but to make it look like they were writing about the future. For example, if I write about 9/11 and the Twin Towers, but instead of saying they fell on that date, if I said they will fall on 9/11/2001, then someone who later comes across my writing might think, oh, he must have written this before the events because he said it will happen. If they were not there when I wrote it, how would they ever know whether I prophesied the event or if I was writing after it happened, but just making it look like I was writing it beforehand? Now, when you consider what we've already said about issues number 1 and 2, then the track record of the God who supposedly inspired these prophecies becomes sketchy, and this pushes me towards Vaticinium ex eventu. And it gets worse. Number 5, the evolution of religion. This pertains to ancient Israelite religion, then Judaism, then Christianity. It would take more time than I'd like for this video if I were to go into this one, but it is uncanny to me how the biblical conception of God changes and looks like the gods of Mesopotamia, Canaan, Egypt, Persia, then finally Greco-Roman religion, as each of these groups came to power. God in the Bible goes from Elohim and a plurality with the sons of God or the divine council in the Old Testament to God the Father with a human baby mama and a divine human son in the New Testament. Think about that. In the Old Testament, it was forbidden for the sons of God to go into the daughters of man. But now, when Israel is under Greco-Roman rule and the gods of Greece and Rome are impregnating human women right and left, well, what does Israel's God do? He sets his eyes on Mary, and even though she's betrothed to be married, God plants his holy seed in her. But think about it. If you didn't have an afterlife or a heaven or hell that people could go to in most of the Old Testament, or a Holy Spirit, and then after spending a little bit of time under Persian rule and then Greece, where these ideas were plentiful, and now all of a sudden you've got these ideas in your religion too, something's up with that.
And you got a goatee.
I did.
Did you get that after you helped me move and you saw mine?
Yes. Goatee.
If every time I get a new pair of shoes, here you come a week later with the same exact pair of shoes, just different laces, and every time I get a new hoodie, here you come a month later with the exact same hoodie, same slogan and everything, just a different color, Clearly, you're copying my fit. You didn't have that until you saw me with mine. Now, Christians will say, no, this is progressive revelation. God was always going to reveal that there was a hell, that God had a son and the Holy Spirit. He was just waiting for the right time. Okay, maybe. But it's very convenient that the right time was after you found out that your captors had those things first. I think we call this syncretism. Gotta keep it moving. Number 6, unconvincing gospel narratives. What I mean by unconvincing is that they are unreliable as history due to their late dates, contradictory material, apparent theological shaping, obvious evolution and unnatural development, and again, mythical elements that mimic the metaphysical views of the Greco-Roman world. We have very good reason to believe that Mark was the first gospel written. In Mark, Jesus has no origin that is worth mentioning. He is not born of a virgin. He is not divine. He is not seen on earth after his death. There is only a report of his resurrection, which was a common trope for legendary men and great leaders of the time. The thinking seems to be that these men were so great that their story could not simply end with their death. They would experience an apotheosis, being deified and glorified after death. However, in Matthew and Luke, the legend of Jesus grows, and by the time John writes, Jesus is identified as the Logos and is making himself equal with God. That's not how history works, but that is how legends are born. 7. The failed prophecies of Jesus, Paul, and Peter. In the text, these individuals clearly thought and taught that Jesus was going to return as a ruler in the lifetime of the original audience. Jesus, in Mark 13 and Matthew 24, makes a prediction that the generation listening to him at that time would not pass away until he returned. There are entire factions of Christians who have moved to believing that Jesus actually did return in the 1st century AD, just spiritually, because they know that if he did not, that would make Jesus a failed apocalyptic prophet. Other Christians try to say that Jesus was giving a conditional prophecy, and that because mankind did not meet the stipulations, Jesus didn't follow through on his end. What are some of those stipulations? One was the gospel would be preached to all nations. And that hasn't happened yet, has it? But is that what Jesus in this story meant? Did he mean the known world at that time? Or was he referring to even parts of the world that no one at that time even knew existed or had any way to get to? Because if that's what he meant, then he's giving them a conditional prophecy, a condition which they had no way to meet, and yet telling them that they would see these things. So it was a non-prophecy, one that he never had plans to fulfill in their lifetime, yet he made it to them anyway. But it sure seems like some of the things that Jesus said would happen in the end did happen. For instance, in 70 AD, the Jewish temple was destroyed, and that was the main end-time sign that they were asking about. So why does that begin to happen, yet everything else that Jesus talks about doesn't? Rather than bend the text out of shape this way, it makes more sense to conclude that this is best explained by the same technique that we have already discussed, and that is that this supposed prophecy was Vaticanium ex eventu, written after the fact, that is, after the destruction of the temple, and then passed off to make it look like it was written or spoken by Jesus beforehand. It's weird. Most of the biblical prophecies about things in the past are pretty accurate, but all the prophecies about things in the actual future fail, unless they're so vague that they could actually be applied to anything. How do we explain this? Number 8, Jesus and his friends were wrong. Jesus, Paul, and Peter seem to think that Adam, Eve, Noah, and other parts of the primordial history in Genesis chapters 1 through 11 are literal or historical and not just literary.
6, 7, 8, 9.
Number 9, the morality of Bible God. I've written an entire chapter on the shifting or evolving morality in the Bible, looking at just how grotesque the commands of God were in the Old Testament, from commissioning genocide to commanding that the infant female children of the people they were exterminating were to be kept alive for their own sexual pleasure, to the sanctioning of ethnic-based slavery. Some apologists try to make it seem as if Israel's morality was better than or progressive when compared to some of the nations around her. But that is subjective in some cases and patently false in others. The claim that biblical slavery was like indentured servitude or that it was only meant to last for 7 years is not a good defense because those stipulations only applied to Hebrew slaves, not slaves acquired from the nations around Israel, whom God says they can buy and treat harshly and pass them down from one generation to the next as an inheritance perpetually. This is lifelong chattel slavery. The claim that these laws were progressively getting better is an attempt to revision what the text actually says. Psalm 119 does not say God's laws were progressive, but rather that they are righteous and holy and the pathway to purity. But these ethnocentric and misogynistic laws are enough for me to conclude that no righteous, loving, all-wise God could have commanded these things. However, I can easily imagine bigoted, self-centered men giving themselves these rights.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
And lastly, number 10, the non-univocality of the Bible. First, what does that term even mean? Break it down. Uni, one. Vocal, easy, right? Voice. Univocality is the idea that even though there were dozens of authors who contributed to the Bible, they nonetheless speak with one voice and tell one story from beginning to end, Genesis to Revelation. And even if they seem at various points to disagree or contradict, that just means it's the reader's job to study and figure out how the apparent contradictions are not really contradictions, but rather things that God has tasked you with the privilege and responsibility to figure out how to harmonize. This puts the Christian on a lifelong mission to reconcile the irreconcilable. You will take positions, change positions, evolve, rack your brain, feel like God is hiding, then feel like you're getting closer to God throughout the rest of your life as you spend time in the text trying to make it all make sense. You'll feel like you're on a lifelong treasure hunt, and the prize is what A.W. Tozer called the knowledge of the holy, and it will seem more precious to you than your very life. Ask me how I know, how I'm able to describe this feeling so well. It was in seminary that I realized that the claim of univocality was a legend, and worse, a lie. A horrible, horrible, easily detectable lie. If only you're brave enough to open your eyes and face it without the presuppositions of divine inspiration and biblical inerrancy. If you hold to those things, then you will force the Bible to fit that mold, as opposed to letting it be what it actually is. Whether it be the two competing creation accounts of Genesis chapter 1 versus Genesis chapter 2, or the way the gospel writers reshape one another's stories and disagree with each other, or the way the New Testament writers use the Old Testament to make it say things that it never meant. It becomes clear that there is no one voice. The biblical text has a multiple personality disorder, and this explains why Bible God seems so schizophrenic. This was not a problem for Jews originally, because they did not approach the Bible the way that many Christians do. Even if they had their own view of inspiration, they nonetheless saw the irreconcilable voices and embraced them all for the different insights and cultural currency they had to offer. On the other hand, this is the reason why there are so many different Christian denominations. It is a result of the many competing voices in the text. The variety, the many faces of Christianity, is a mirror reflection of the splintered text that they are all peering into. And all of this is to say nothing about the many different possible options that are available to translators in the process of rendering the ancient Hebrew or Greek text into another language. There is no way to guarantee that they have chosen the right option for any particular passage. On top of that, we don't even have the original manuscripts, so we can never even check our current copies against what was originally written to see how accurate they are. So then, the entire enterprise might well be an exercise in futility. If a God was going to speak to us through a written word, this God chose the worst way to communicate its ideas to humanity. And all of this is why I don't really see myself debating Christians, because what's there to debate? Nothing I've said in this entire video is really controversial. You can find committed Christians that will echo some or all parts of each of these points I've laid out, and I cite some of them in my book. So discussions, maybe, but debates, if it ain't true, it ain't true. We can discard it and move on. Let me know in the comments which of these 10 resonates most with you, or did I miss any?